Since ancient times in the Persis family, only alphas have been born. And among these alphas, those who could give birth were chosen by the oracle, who is like a god in this world. But since they were all alphas, their bodies were not designed to bring life into the world, so they had to become Smyrna. The Perseru family was known as the eagles that protect the borders of the Empire of Odia, and due to their superior lineage, only alphas were born within this family. The alphas were the most valuable in the empire. They increased their power by joining forces with other families, and the Perseru always thought they would keep the glory. But everything would change from that moment on. We meet Teo Perseris, the alpha who would become Smyrna in that generation. Being received as a war hero when appearing before the king, he is offered anything he wants due to his great contribution to the war. So Teo asks to retire, which clearly meant rejecting the king's will. The old man allows him to leave, though deep down he seems to despise him since he became Smyrna, because he no longer even considered him an alpha. But what is a Smyrna exactly? Smyrna is a temporary state of the body in which the alpha can become pregnant, almost like an omega, and this is achieved through the forbidden fruit of Shira. That night, while Teo was preparing, one of his soldiers informed him that they had already caught and locked up the head of the revolutionaries, so they could begin interrogating him. But Teo only gives the order to keep him there, because he, like the other soldiers, needed to rest. Teo thinks about how difficult it was to capture Saram Marita, the fourth prince and leader of the Lares. The Lares, who were chosen by the dragon, were quite difficult opponents due to their use of spiritual powers. That night, precisely, Teo, who was already Smyrna, was preparing to mix with another alpha. Thus, he would conceive the next successor of the Perseru. Meanwhile, Saram, who had managed to escape from the dungeon, was lost in that enormous castle. Due to a barrier that had been put up, he could not use his spiritual powers to escape. His attempts to get out of that place were interrupted when he was invaded by a strong essence of Omega. By the way, if you haven't noticed, Saram is also an alpha. He is practically hypnotized by the attractive smell, and upon entering the room where that aroma came from, he meets nothing more and nothing less than his worst enemy, Teo. Teo, until now, had kept his blindfold on and couldn't see who the man in front of him was. He asks him not to be nervous because they are both alphas. Because, now that he was Smyrna, he could be treated like an omega. He had been chosen by the oracle to be the one to give birth to the new successor of the family. He only asks Saram not to bite his neck. Saram was in a terrible internal conflict. What was a Smyrna? And why did an alpha smell like an omega? Also, he had his enemy right there, vulnerable before him, but his instincts were stronger. He felt the need to take the person in front of him and make him completely his. Then he just gave up to his lowest desires, but while he was taking him, it was very difficult for him to control himself. He was too excited. This had obviously been felt by Teo. Supposedly that man only had to put it in, and also, the voice of that alpha was strangely very familiar to him. Teo was already losing his patience at the attitude of the other alpha, so he decides to take off the blindfold. He frowns when he sees that the leader of the revolutionaries was the one he was mixing with. So much had been the scare that they stayed stuck together for several hours, because it seems that Saram had nodded in him. Just at that moment, a guard arrives to inform them that Saram had escaped. He tries to flee, but the guards go behind him. When he is alone, Teo knows that he has just screwed his offspring when mixing with a Langlares. The next day, they inform him that they managed to catch Saram and that his execution date would be in a week. He believes that a week is too soon to know, but by how bad his body feels, it is very likely that he has become pregnant by his worst enemy. A week later, Saram is taken out of his cell. He was almost sure that he was going to be executed. But he is surprised to see Teo waiting for him. Without explaining anything, both mix their blood, and the glow resulting from said union confirms that they are expecting a child. Saram does not understand how an alpha could get pregnant and, furious, Teo only gives him the choice between being executed right there or becoming his Capri. According to this work, a Capri is the one that leaves its seed inside its Smyrna until it forms an egg. Together, the Smyrna and his Capri protect the egg until it hatches. If any of them die, the egg runs the risk of disappearing. This is also the reason why the Perseru are known as the Eagles of the Empire, because they have their children through eggs. In the end, Saram ends up accepting to become Capri of Teo. But for this, he must change his name so that no one knows he is a Lores. In addition to being under the protection of the Perseru, until the egg hatches, he he will be able to recover his name and his freedom. Saram warns him that if he sets him free, he would return to the head of the revolutionary army. Teo could not care less because he would always end up winning. So Saram signs the contract that prevents him from leaving before the egg comes out. Otherwise, he could die, and only Teo can terminate said contract. Now his new name would be Set. Days later, Teo finds himself thinking about how incredible it is that only Set can feel the supposed omega pheromones coming out of him. On the way to his room, he finds himself thinking about this very thing. When he passes by where his Capri was staying, he sees him come out with his sculpted body. His beauty was undeniable, and Teo, unable to resist, ends up succumbing to self-love. The next day, Set is being fitted for clothes for the party where he will be presented as Teo's Capri. This one praises him, saying how handsome he is, but above all, he reminds him not to take off his mask. Others could recognize his true identity, and that could not happen in this world. That night, Set finds himself thinking about how miserable he feels being locked in that castle, without being able to communicate with his troops, and without being able to use his spiritual powers. As much as he has tried to escape, the contract he signed with Teo prevents him, because every time he moves away, his body weakens. But above all, he cannot forget that he is his worst enemy, the one who brought down his army. The most important thing is that now she will have a child with that terrible man. This makes her remember the words of her mother when they told her that the Liras are born with a guardian spirit. A guardian spirit accompanies them until their last days, and now that her son also carried her blood, she had to prepare a spiritual tree for him. Meanwhile, Teo, who had finished his work, was preparing to go to rest, but when passing by a huge window, he felt something strange. Observing the intensity of the moon, suddenly, his body loses strength, and it seems to react to something. This was something that Set had also felt. He can't resist the aroma that it gave off and goes to meet it, unable to believe that being an alpha would attract him in that way. Although it was very strange for both of them, neither could control themselves, but it's not like they resisted much either. While they were about to have turbo mega delicious time, a mark appeared on his belly that only his Capri could notice. They still don't pay much attention to it and continue to fill the egg with love. The next morning, Teo remembers the terrible night he spent with his Capri. Even his assistant notices the change in his countenance, and Teo himself recognizes that he feels fresher. This assistant, who also keeps him informed about all of Set's actions, tells him that Set looks very interested in the trees in the place. At the same time, Set was looking for the right tree for his son because the Laris, chosen descendants of the dragon, are born with spirits. They die serving Maya, the goddess of the earth. When blessed with the birth of a new being, it was an honor to protect their children. However, the son of Odia, or rather Teo, had destroyed them, including the spiritual tree that protected the Langjeras. Unfortunately, he was also the person carrying his son. He couldn't believe that now he was his partner and that she had a contract tying him to him. But if his son would have his blood, it was necessary for him to be born with a guardian spirit. At night, Teo was checking the status of her pregnancy, and before leaving, the doctor prescribed some pills to improve her condition. Set, noticing the strange intentions of the smelly old man, entered Teo's bedroom and saw the bottle of medicine. He didn't pay much attention at the moment, but instead, he told Teo that he wanted to plant a tree for his son to continue the tradition of the Lares. At this, Teo gets upset and reminds him that he should not take more liberties than those he is entitled to. Teo warns him to remember his place well since they are still enemies. Poor Set feels ridiculed by Teo's words, and as he looks at the moon, he remembers the story his mother used to tell him, strangely resembling his situation with Teo. At the same time, Teo had taken the supposed medicine given to him. It seems to have put him into horny mode, making him seek the proximity of his Capri. The next morning, Teo seems not to remember anything and asks Set about what had happened. Set clarifies that Teo had come looking for him alone and that he was acting strangely, with a different scent and eye color, possibly due to some medicine he had taken. Teo starts thinking about this, and shortly after ordering an investigation, he is notified of something serious. The study results on the medicine prescribed to him revealed that it contained a dangerous ingredient called the Lilith flower. This ingredient was mostly used to terminate pregnancies. It was clear that the rats of the Odia Empire were behind this attack on his little baby. However, Teo only gives the order to investigate potential threats, as he lacks solid evidence for a direct accusation. At night, Teo decides to ask Set if he knows anything about that plant. Since Set was the only one who noticed something strange, he tells Teo about the dangers the plant represents for their child. Set gets very angry when he realizes that they want to harm his baby. But because of their sudden closeness, Teo, who seems to still be under the effects of the pill, cannot contain himself before the beauty of his Capri. Of course, Set offers to help him lower his fever, and Teo asks why he is kind to him despite being enemies. Set tells him it is because he carries his son in her womb, and also, the Lyras consider the birth of a child extremely important. For this reason, they have mixed their blood with other races, believing it an honor to share their genes. Teo remembers that because of this same kindness of the Lyras in the past, both kingdoms had been friends. On the very day of Teo's Capri presentation to society, some interesting events take place. Set looks very handsome, and everyone thinks he is some prince instead of a mercenary, as the rumor said. The most important moment comes when they run into an Omega. This Omega does not take his eyes off them, especially Z. This was the male Rose, one of those who had been hitting on Teo. At one point during the night, he even tells Teo that he doesn't care that he's become Esmirna. He still wants to marry him. But of course, Set wouldn't let any home-wrecking cat get near Little Love. Reaffirming the fact that he is now Teo's partner, he takes him by the waist and behaves affectionately with him in front of all the aristocrats. This causes the Omega to lose control of his anger, and he is about to throw his wine at Set. However, the protagonist intervenes and tells the Omega that he was abusive with his Capri, and that his greed has blinded him. With this act, he completely rejected any commitment with him. And well, no way. The poor guy could only run away. Unfortunately, after the party, when they were alone, Teo gave Set a tremendous slap for being so reckless. Having treated him too closely in front of the others caused a misfortune. This led both of them to distance themselves and ignore each other for several days. Because of this, the pregnancy had begun to bother Teo more than necessary. Without the essence of his Capri, he suffered discomfort. The new doctor, who was an Omega, recommended that Teo should try to be with his Capri regularly, without overdoing it, or things with the egg could get complicated. But another fortuitous event occurs. Set had received his Ruth, and Teo, like every gladiator, decided to take care of the beast that he had between his legs. Well, in the middle of the hip action, Teo recognized something. Giving himself to Set as a Capri was completely different from how it was supposed to be with others. With the others, it was an act without kisses or caresses. All being alphas, when they took him, he, as Smyrna, couldn't bear their looks of mockery. That's why he began to use blindfolds. But Set was different. It was literally like, I've had this 1,000 times, but I've never made love. They ended up doing it 30 times. Then due to the exhaustion from so much exercise, Teo fainted. Set panicked, thinking he had hurt him and his child. But after resting and being checked by the doctor, everything was fine. Still, it could have been dangerous to do it so many times for so long. Hearing from Teo's mouth that everything was fine, Set felt relieved. But he still couldn't let there be danger in the future. For this reason, this time, he was firm in asking Teo to let him plant a spiritual tree so their son could be healthy. To Set's surprise, this time, Teo accepted without hesitation, and so they did. To plant the tree, the energy of both parents was needed. Teo found this strange, but still participated in the ritual. When both said his name, Set pronounced a spell, and a beautiful and enormous olive tree appeared before them. This would now be the tree that protected their son. Seeing this, Teo remembered the tree that the Perseru destroyed. The birth of a new tree was proof of their son's blessing. Set's magic was noticed by his revolutionary comrades. This gave them the indication that their leader was fine. They immediately sent word to the others. The next morning, Teo woke up in the arms of his Capri, noticing the marks left on him from the night before. Upon waking, Set immediately worried about cleaning him up so that he wouldn't feel uncomfortable with his essence there. A little later, Teo's assistant informed him of recent sightings of monsters near the border. These creatures threatened the peace and lives of the people. For a moment, Teo stopped paying attention because he noticed Teo and the doctor smiling at each other. This made Set feel a little strange. Was it jealousy? He didn't quite understand it, so he refused to accept it. But there was something more important to take care of. Teo personally took charge of subduing the monsters. The one who also screamed upon hearing this was Set. He couldn't believe it. How could Teo be so irresponsible as to risk his life and their sons by going to that place, even though Set tried to make him see reason? Teo wouldn't back down. Swallowing his pride and anger, Set took Teo to the protective tree. He instructed Teo to take 2 leaves. Even though it seemed strange, Teo did as he was told. And that's how the two most beautiful little things in all of Manhwa were born. Set was a little disappointed because they weren't supposed to look that way. Maybe it was due to the limitation of their powers. But he still hoped they would work. He explained to Teo that those two were guardian spirits. Each one would stay with them, and if separated, they would send signals to inform them of each other's status. Before leaving, Set had to inject Teo with enough Capri essence, as they wouldn't see each other for several days. But before he could do so, a spirit's gaze interrupted them. It was so intense that they had to cover them out of embarrassment. At the borders, Teo realized the monsters seemed peaceful. However, the alpha monster was the real problem. With a sudden attack, Teo decided to face it, but things were more complicated than he had anticipated. At the most inopportune moment, his stomach began to hurt. Too much time had passed without the essence of his Capri. The monster took advantage of this, launching its strongest blow. It seemed like Teo's life was about to end. But just at that moment, the spirit similar to Z appeared before him. Using his spiritual power, at the last second he managed to create a barrier that prevented Teo from being harmed. However, this was not enough. The monster broke through its defense, but the impact affected it as well. Teo took this opportunity to deliver the final blow, shattering the monster's power core. Although they managed to defeat it, the spirit collapsed. Teo panicked, believing the spirit had died. He immediately asked the doctor to heal him first, since he had sacrificed himself to save him. The doctor explained that, being a spirit, there wasn't much he could do. That night, Teo felt overwhelmed. He didn't want anything to happen to his guardian. Watching him rest, he still couldn't believe the striking resemblance the spirit had to his Capri. The next morning, Teo ordered the Duke of Agris to be sent the fragments of the monster's core. He had been informed that more materials were needed for a magic weapon. This Duke was the lord and ruler of the entire Eastern Territory. He also owned the Tower of the Magicians, meaning he was incredibly powerful. Additionally, Teo ordered preparations to leave. That place was not good for his son, and he wanted to return as soon as possible to ensure his spirit was okay. Meanwhile, in another scene, the Duke of Agris and his husband examined the fragments Teo had sent. They wondered whether they should thank him for the gift, or share with Theo and Perseru the truth they knew. Back with Teo, as soon as he arrived, his first request was for Set to heal the little guardian. He explained that the guardian had been attacked. Set's immediate concern was whether Teo or the baby had been hurt, but Teo reassured him. He explained that, thanks to the little guardian, he was safe. Noticing Set's concern, Teo assured him that as long as the tree remained unharmed, the spirits would also be fine. He then handed the guardian over to recover, thanks to the tree's magical energy. When Set saw the relief on Teo's face, his body moved on its own. He gave Teo a beautiful kiss, one that the other did not expect. When they separated, both were surprised. Set didn't understand why he had acted that way. Strangely, Teo did not react with anger like the first time Set had pretended to be close to him. Something new was growing in both their hearts. After a few days of awkwardly avoiding each other because of the unexpected kiss, Teo could no longer delay his treatment. He needed the essence of his Capri. That night, he decided to take the first step. After all, he did it for his baby. After their passionate moments, the next day he was informed that the Duke of Agris had requested a visit. Teo knew that with such a powerful being, it was only a matter of time before he discovered the true identity of his Capri. They would have to hide Set to ensure the Duke never saw him. On the day of the visit, Teo felt tense in the Duke's presence. Agris told him that he was sent by his mother to verify the identity and origin of his Capri. Although he already knew, Agris claimed he was there to help him. He reminded Teo of the consequences if the Emperor were to discover that he had taken Aleres as his Capri. Agris also reminded him that Teo himself had led the army that wiped out the country of Lares. Feeling powerless, Teo asked him, "So what do you want from me?" Very calmly, the Duke responded, "Nothing in particular. Simply the mother of your Capri is a relative of my husband. That's why I took an interest in your situation." From here on, a series of shocking revelations unfolded. It turned out that the Lares were descendants of Newman. As he revealed this truth, the Duke used his magic to stop time. He created a separate dimension where only the two of them existed. The knowledge he was about to share was a secret known only to a select few. The Lares literally had dragon blood in their veins. The Duke began to explain the origin of everything: the Langeras, the dragons, and their ancient history. The mission of his dragon brothers was to protect the stars created by God. In other words, the Duke himself was a dragon. Dragons were born from the stars. At birth, they were welcomed by others of their kind. When a star's power reached its peak, a new dragon was born. The amniotic liquid of the star eventually gave life to another being. However, during this process, one star failed to give birth. Her dragon brothers abandoned her. A human named Shaka Newman fell in love with that dragon. Despite knowing that human lives were short, they loved each other deeply. From their union, the Longires were born, literally descendants of dragons. At that time, the planet where dragons lived was dying. The abandoned star fused with the planet, transforming her body into mountains and rivers. The last thing the Duke managed to say to Teo was, "Shaka told me that humans are beings who forge their own destiny." That was the last thing he said before Set arrived, having broken through the barrier of the dimension. Seeing him, the Duke decided to show him, through undeniable facts, everything he had just explained about the dragons and their offspring. Here came another shocking revelation. The reason the Emperor of Odea had ordered Teo and his army to destroy a small country like Langaris was because its people inherited madness. Their human bodies could not withstand the immense power of having the blood and form of a dragon. Alone, they were unable to control that power. They needed spirits to protect and stabilize them, but sometimes, even that wasn't enough. They would lose all their humanity, falling into madness. And that was what the Emperor feared. That was why he ordered their extermination. Now, Teo realized that this same blood, the blood of dragons, was what his future son would inherit. The Duke's words echoed in his mind over and over again. A human body cannot handle a dragon's blood. That is why the Lares have long bred with other species to dilute it. But even then, if they use too much mana, their madness revives. Meanwhile, Set was fighting against himself, struggling not to lose control and harm Teo or their unborn child. He no longer cared what happened to him. His only concern was the baby. Since his protective spirit had been destroyed by Teo, the only thing he could do now was plant an olive tree for his child, ensuring its safety in the future. Desperate, he begged Teo not to abandon the baby. The Duke was surprised by Set's immense willpower to control himself. Contrary to Set's fears, Teo took him into his arms, holding him close to calm him down. He assured Set that he would not abandon their child. Now that he knew the truth, he had still chosen to have the baby because it was their child, born from both of them. At that moment, two small, beautiful spirits appeared, surrounding them with their spiritual power. Their presence helped Set return to normal. Seeing them, the Duke finally understood Shaka's words about destiny. Set and Teo, despite both being alphas, were fated souls, meant to be together. Once everything settled down, Teo asked the Duke why he had revealed all this to him. The Duke simply answered with a smirk. For fun. As a dragon who had lived for so long, he found life dull at times, but in the end he made it clear that he was completely on Teo's side. Now that Teo knew the truth, he felt terrible. He remembered how he had destroyed the Lares and burned Set's protective tree. Now he understood why Set had insisted so much on planting a tree for their unborn child. It was necessary for its survival. Despite all of this, Teo remained firm in his decision. He would have his child. The olive tree would be safe under Perseus' protection. Meanwhile, the Duke had sent word to Teo's mother, gossiping that her son's Capri came from Angelus. There was a possibility that he was Miriam's son. This caught Ali's attention, as she deeply treasured the memory of this woman, Set's mother. With this in mind, she decided to pay a visit to her son. Almost a week passed since Set had recovered. Manifesting his dragon form had drained too much of his energy, and it had also affected Teo, who needed the essence of his Capri to recover. Not wanting to waste any more time, they finally shared their delicious moments together. Amidst their passion, Set asked, "When will our little one be born?" Smyrna's eggs usually spent 7 months inside their mother's body. Then, they would need another 5 months before they could hatch. In total, it took a whole year for them to be born. Now that Set thought about it, 5 months had already passed. In 2 more months, their egg would emerge. Time had flown by so quickly. A few days later, they welcomed Mrs. Dally Perkis. Seeing Teo and Set together, she immediately noticed the strong resemblance between them. When Set realized her presence, she laughed and told him how much he resembled his mother. Shocked, Set asked how Mrs. Perkis knew her. As if it were the most natural thing in the world, she revealed, "Miriam was the love of my life." When the two were alone, Teo asked her if she really had that type of relationship with the mother of his Capri. She confirmed it, but back then, as now, her duty was more important. She had to separate from Mariam to become Smyrna and bring him into the world. That is why she advised Teo to let Set go. His duty as Alpha in Smyrna of the Perseru and the Empire of Odia came first. Most importantly, she told him that she discovered someone wanted to harm his pregnancy. It was all orchestrated by the Crown Prince, revealing that those he considered allies had betrayed her. Even she in the past had almost lost Teo due to the Lilith flower. Surprisingly, Teo resisted his mother's request to let Set go, insisting that he needed him for their baby. Teo, who had never contradicted her before, now opposed her. Perhaps he had fallen in love? He tried to deny it, but his Capri was a prisoner of war. He couldn't just let him go. His mother insisted that the only way for Set and his son to survive the Emperor and the Prince was for Teo to take another Capri in his place. Teo was direct and told Set it was time to annul their contract. This news hit Set like a kick from a horse. But seeing Teo's firm attitude, he understood there were deeper reasons behind it and chose not to oppose him. All of high society soon learned that Teo would change Capri. The Emperor seized the chance to offer him one, but Adali rejected it with a white glove response. He reminded him of the deal between the House of Perseru and the imperial family. Total loyalty to the empire, but no interference in Perseru's affairs. They already shared blood ties. If their relationship grew closer, the balance could be lost. But more than that, her words were a warning. She knew what they were up to. They had tried to sabotage her pregnancy before, and now they were targeting her son. A few days later, Set spent his time reflecting, longing to see Teo one last time. His thoughts were interrupted by the doctor, who informed him that Teo was about to take another Capri. This was another devastating blow, and Set rushed to see his Smyrna. He found Teo in a room, waiting, just like their first night together. Teo, however, was reluctant to expose himself to anyone but Set. When the new Alpha entered, something about his presence felt familiar. Before him stood Saran Marita. The moment their eyes met, Saran embraced him with devotion. "You're sick of me? No matter what happens, I will not give up my place to anyone else. You are my only Smyrna, and I, your only Capri. Even after our child is born, that will not change. You can never think about having another Capri. I don't know your reasons, but come with me. Let's escape together. But first, let's explain why the Emperor hates. The Perseru, despite sharing blood ties with the imperial family, chose to stay out of imperial conflicts to maintain balance. They were powerful and prosperous. Although loyal to the empire, they openly opposed the emperor's unfavorable decisions. This defiance made him feel inferior, believing his power was threatened. For generations, the imperial family held deep resentment toward the Perseru. But eliminating such a powerful house wasn't easy. They needed a justifiable reason. This is why we will soon see the emperor's desperate attempts to get rid of Teo. However, contrary to expectations, Teo's love for Set proved stronger than his duty. He agreed to leave with Set, first because he loved him, and second to protect their baby. Set and Teo were escaping from the power of the Emperor, who had already tried to end Teo's pregnancy. When Adali found out her son had left with his Smyrna, she was not angry. She had expected this to happen. She knew her son needed to live that part of his life, something she never had the chance to do herself. She had once given up love for duty. Those born under the Perseru house were condemned to live in cages, unable to love freely. They always had to adhere to the Empire's laws, which is why she was happy that her son fled. Since she had seen this coming, she had already prepared to take care of Perseru in his absence. That's why she didn't send soldiers after him. He had to spread his wings and fly. Meanwhile, Teo and Set had managed to get far enough from the castle to rest. Teo was anxious, fearing that Perseru's soldiers would come after them at any moment. Seeing his worry, Set reassured him, saying that no one would come after them, at least not yet. To avoid being discovered, Set sought permission from a tree spirit to hide them. In that intimate moment, emotions ran high, and they gave in to their desires. Set became so overwhelmed that when he buried himself deep, he worried he might have hurt their child. Teo calmed him down, assuring him that their egg was fine. Even when he had fought that monster, their son had remained unharmed, strong like his father. These words filled Set's heart with happiness, and he poured all his love into Teo. The next morning, he woke up in his man's arms, feeling at peace. After getting ready, Teo decided to take some time alone. Before he realized it, the spirits surrounded him, sensing something dangerous approaching. The reason Teo wanted some space was that he had long felt someone following them. Being alone, he decided to confront the presence head-on. Two warriors appeared before him, Lara's fighters and Set's former companions. Teo challenged them to identify themselves, knowing they weren't Perseru knights. One of them launched a powerful attack, but the spirits, in their full form, stopped it. Perceiving the warriors as threats, they subdued them to protect Teo. One of the warriors recognized the spirits as the guardians, summoned by Set. Set arrived just in time to clarify the situation and explain everything that had happened. Since his capture by Perseru, Set had lost contact with his men. Now he told them that while Tu was once their enemy, he was now carrying Set's child. Realizing their mistake, the two warriors apologized and properly introduced themselves. The red-haired boy was named Jigs, while the other was called Biding. Biding forgot to mention an important detail. He was Set's Moonmaster. He immediately realized his mistake, introducing himself with that title in front of Set's current partner. To make things worse, the reckless Jigs began asking if Odia had no Moonmasters for their alphas. He explained that a Moonmaster was an Omega who trained Royal Alphas. Moonmasters were responsible for teaching Royal Alphas how to properly hold and handle an Omega. Only members of the royal family could receive this training. Since Set was the fourth prince of Laris, Biding had been his moon teacher. This made Set nervous, fearing that Teo would misunderstand their past relationship. However, Teo remained calm. They were both dominant alphas and adults. There was no issue. The main concern now was reaching Monteria, Duke Agris's neutral territory. The Odian army could not pursue them there. Teo realized that, if not for his mother's support, he would never have followed Set. She had prepared for this in advance. Sensing the atmosphere, Biding left them alone to talk, but the conversation wasn't particularly serious. Teo simply admitted that he was not jealous of Set's past with Biding. After all, Set wasn't the only one with a history. Teo too had many partners before meeting him. Hearing this, Set expresses his discontent and tells Teo that while he knows about his past, he doesn't want to hear him talk about it. He doesn't like knowing that others have seen his body. However, Set clarifies that Teo is the first person he has kissed, the first to share his lips, and the first for whom he has felt this way. This reassurance calms Teo down. That night, after dinner, Jigs and Biding tell them they will leave to find a carriage so they can reach Monteria faster. Once alone, Set still feels uncomfortable. Teo, sensing Set's restlessness, remembers feeling jealous for the first time when he saw Set with his Omega Doctor, but he also realizes that jealousy wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe Set wanted him to feel jealous. Perhaps for him, Teo's jealousy was a sign that he cared. Teo decides to tease him, saying he did feel a little jealous. He promises to make Set feel something he's never felt before. To do so, he begins to play the flute, which overwhelms Set with stimulation, erasing all the bad feelings between them. By the next morning, they were ready to leave for Monteria. Since they had been active the night before and had a quick moment together in the morning, Jigs made a teasing remark. He casually comments that it's good they've reconciled, as strange noises had been coming from them all morning. Even the spirits knew Jigs was reckless, but it still left them embarrassed. They traveled for most of the day until they encountered a group of soldiers. They were supposedly from Perseru, but Teo knew better. His mother would never send such a small force, realizing that someone else had sent them while pretending to be Perseru. Teo didn't hesitate to strike with all his strength. However, Set didn't want Teo to fight for the sake of their child. As Teo watched, he noticed Set losing control, slowly transforming into a dragon. This immediately reminded him of Agris's warning. The next time Set used his power, he might not survive. Teo also recalled that the last time Set transformed, Agris had poured energy into him. Back then, Teo had been able to calm him, using the aura of Perseru Knights. The Perseru aura had the ability to absorb mana from opponents. Understanding the danger, Teo didn't hesitate to intervene, suppressing Set's power and returning him to normal. Meanwhile, Jigs and Biding had already taken care of the remaining enemies. That night, Teo decided to help Set calm down, knowing his arm still carried the dragon's energy. As time passed in the tranquility of the night, they shared a hug and talked about their baby's future. In his dreams, Set found himself in the presence of the dragon inside him. The energy within him felt overwhelming, as if it wanted to consume him. Just when he thought he would be absorbed, he saw a beautiful girl named Tara running toward him and Teo. In this vision, they truly looked like a family, happy and at peace. Set realized he still had people he wanted to protect, which gave him the strength to face the dragon within. He vowed that he would never let madness consume him. The dragon's power had to be sealed deep inside. It was a beautiful dream, but it was not entirely his own. This vision was the work of Agris's husband, who manipulated his subconscious to show him the best possible future. He wanted to give Set a real reason to keep fighting. For those with brave hearts like Set, those who still held hope became even stronger in the face of adversity. Mrs. Adali, who had taken command of Perseru while her son was away, welcomed Carleon. Like Perseru, Carleon belonged to a family of dukes in the Empire of Odia. Carleon did not hide his intentions or the reason for his visit. He wanted to know where Teo was, who his current Capri was, and most importantly, he wanted to become his new Capri. It did not matter to him that the egg inside Teo belonged to another man. He was willing to raise that child as if it were his own. But Adali knew the imperial family's true intentions. They sought to control and seize power in Perseru, believing that Perseru had grown too strong. Adali made it clear that the emperor had no say in what happened within Perseru. Though they served the empire, Perseru remained autonomous. Whatever happened to Teo was his decision alone. She knew Carleon's obsession, his desire to keep Teo for himself. But as his mother, she would not allow it. With this declaration, Adali made it clear that Perseru would not submit to the emperor. This, in turn, was a declaration of war. Understanding the danger ahead, Adali ordered all of Perseru to prepare for the difficult times approaching. They were on the brink of war, and she would not let them be caught unprepared. Meanwhile, Set and Teo had finally reached their destination. It was time to part ways with jigs and biting. The two warriors showed sincerity to Teo before leaving. They touched their foreheads to his hands, a Lauresian gesture signifying respect and a request for blessing. It reminded Teo of Miriam, who had once greeted him in the same way. Upon arriving at Agris's domain, they sensed something unusual. The entire city's inhabitants were nothing but illusions, a deception created by the Duke himself. Agris then appeared in person to welcome them. Sensing their confusion, he explained that not everyone in Monteria was an illusion, but the city had no true permanent residence. Instead, Monteria was a refuge for those who sought knowledge. It was a place of study, where magic was learned not for strength, but for wisdom and understanding. Agris led them to their quarters, where Set asked about something he had overheard on the journey: a nest. Agris explained the concept as it existed in Perseru. A nest was a specialized structure built for an egg, using a magical device to store and extract parental pheromones. This ensured the egg's proper formation. Normally, such nests were constructed in Perseru, but given their circumstances, the magicians in Monteria would craft one for them. This gave Set a new understanding. In Laris, nests were different. Some Omega races would surround themselves with their alpha's clothes to absorb their scent. Hearing this, Teo reassured Set. He told him that he didn't need something like that because they were always together. He could always have Teo's scent whenever he wanted, no matter what. The next day, they were surprised by the arrival of Teo's doctor, the Omega, who had been monitoring his pregnancy. The doctor was relieved to see them safe. He explained that he had used a teleportation scroll to reach them after hearing they would be in Monteria. His presence was a reminder of Agris's kindness toward them. Agrif had helped them not only because Teo was Adali's son and she had asked for aid, but also because Set was the son of Miriam, a distant relative of Agris's husband. Speaking of Adali, the doctor brought concerning news. Perseru's gates were sealed, and while Teo's mother was alive and well, she had been receiving constant visits from Carleon. Teo knew this was not good. He felt helpless, but he also knew his priority: ensuring the safe birth of his child. Set reminded him that he was there to support him. Days later, Teo was monitoring his egg when the doctor confirmed that everything was progressing normally. Later, as he walked through the gardens, he encountered Agris's husband. The resemblance between them was striking, and Teo couldn't help but think of Miriam. Agris's husband acknowledged this and revealed something strange. He stated that Miriam had already foreseen the future. His role was merely to guide them toward fulfilling it. He assured Teo he was not a threat before disappearing. That evening, Set found Teo deep in thought. He had not seen him all day, but now he saw him happily touching his belly, lost in thought. Teo then asked a question that Set had dreaded. What would happen after the egg was born? He still remembered the contract they had signed, which bound them only until then. Set didn't want to answer. He knew the contract's terms, but he couldn't bear the thought of being separated from Teo and their child. Instead of responding, he acted. He kissed Teo passionately, covering him in affection. It was the only way he could express what he truly felt. He didn't want to let go of Teo or their child. Him and, of course, Teo also enjoyed those moments in which he felt loved. Maybe the subject of the contract could wait a little longer. In a few days, the nest where they would have to impregnate the egg with pheromones was ready. But Set still didn't like that method. He preferred to fill the egg with his pheromones in the traditional way. That meant sharing an intimate moment with his precious Teo. Teo also enjoyed being with Set, but the next morning, he got the scare of his life. His belly was hurting, and Set feared the birth had come early. They rushed to the doctor, who assured them that everything was fine. However, he recommended moving the birth forward due to Teo's modified body. Since his uterus was small, allowing the egg to keep growing could be painful and dangerous. Given Set's concern, the doctor reassured him. The birthing process was safe thanks to magic. The magicians would use scrolls to remove the egg, though the pain wouldn't be completely avoided. As long as his Capri stayed by her side, everything would be fine. Meanwhile, Adali was happy with the news that her son would soon give birth. But now, more than ever, she knew the Emperor would try to find Teo through Carleon. She was grateful to Agris for protecting him. The day of the birth arrived, and no matter how much Teo reassured him, Set was the most nervous. The spirits were already prepared. They had adorable little outfits for the baby, made by the doctor. Moments before the delivery, Set told Teo that he had something important to say after the baby was born. He knew Teo wouldn't like it. Shortly after, the birthing process began. Fortunately, everything went well. The pain was intense, but Set stayed by Teo's side, holding him. The egg came out healthy, and although Teo was weak, he was in good health. As Set held their child, he marveled at its tiny form. He couldn't understand how something so small had caused Teo so much pain. Minutes later, Teo handed the baby to Set so he could see him. But Set had another reason for coming to him. He wanted Teo to accept him and allow him to stay by his side. He knew their contract would soon force them to separate, but he didn't want that. Dropping to his knees, he begged Teo to let him stay. Teo couldn't bear to see the Prince of Angels humiliating himself. He told Set that it was impossible and reminded him that they were enemies. Set couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had truly believed that Teo loved him back, yet now Teo was calling them enemies. Rejecting him was difficult for Teo, but he was the more rational of the two. He had to stay firm for both their sakes. He reminded Set that he was the heir of Laris, with a duty to restore his kingdom. And as the Duke of Perseru, Teo had his own responsibilities. There was no future where they could be together. A time would come when they had to separate, and Set needed to accept that. If Set could not keep his pride, if he could not stand with dignity, then he did not deserve to be Teo's Capri or the father of their child. The next day, Agris quickly realized that they had fought. Acting as the voice of reason, he helped Set understand Teo's decision. Teo had not rejected him out of cruelty. He was only trying to protect him. Love would blind them, putting them and their child in danger. It was not that Teo did not love him. It was that he could not allow that love to control him. Agris made Set see this truth. If Set truly wanted to be with Teo, he had to fulfill his role as the heir of the angels. Only by restoring his kingdom could he be strong enough. With enough strength, they could have a safe place to be together. After all, Teo would not always be the Duke of Perseru. Their son would grow up and take that position. By then, Set needed to be ready to receive them. That had to be his new goal. Set realized he had been irrational and had pressured Teo too much. After reflecting, he went to apologize, finally understanding Teo's reasoning. Set asked Teo to wait for him, to give him time to become strong enough to protect their love. Teo, moved by this, agreed. He knew it would take time, but if it meant their safety, it was worth it. At last, they reconciled, Set resting in Teo's arms. Despite this, Teo still felt guilt. He found it hard to understand how Set could be so at peace with someone who had once destroyed everything he had. He kept this thought to himself. However, there was something he needed to tell Set. The flower he had taken to modify his body was losing effect. Soon, he would become an alpha again. His rut was approaching, and he needed Set to know this. Teo asked Set if he would be willing to spend his rut with him. However, as both were alphas, there was a chance their pheromones would clash. Now that he was no longer Smyrna, but this does not matter to Set. Of course, he was happy that Teo wanted to share his Ruth with him. Meanwhile, in Odia, a banquet was being held among the high nobility. In this meeting was Farah Baudes, older sister of Baron Rose and head of the House of Baudes. She, in the distance, could see Carleon. Farah knew that this man was dangerous. Well, she was aware of the current situation of the Empire, but there was no reason for her to mess with him, or so she thought until she met Adali. Both women were alphas, but Farah felt a special admiration for Adali, so she did not hesitate to listen to her request. After talking for a while, Adali tells her about the bad path the Emperor has been taking. This path was inevitably dragging Perseus into misfortune. At first, the Lares territory was in charge of keeping the monsters subdued, but the Emperor became obsessed with a supposed magic stone that granted the power of creation. Rumors began to spread that this stone was in the wooded area where the monsters were, and that the Angelus protected him. He asked them to find him and give him that stone, but Lares, knowing that no such stone existed, could not please the Emperor. That is why they paid for that disobedience with extinction. Unfortunately, it was Perseus who received the order to carry out such a horrible task. The public was given another version. The Emperor gave the excuse that the Langeras were dangerous because of the dragon's blood, which made them go mad. But only a few knew the truth that Adali was now telling Farah. The Emperor was still obsessed with that stone. According to her information, the next ones he would ask to look for it would be Perseus. Knowing what happened to Lires, not being able to fulfill his request, Perseus also awaited a similar fate. That's why Adali planned to disobey from the beginning. Adali, who knew that Baudes supported the second prince, who stayed away from everyone's sight but was still very strong, asked Farah to help protect little Teo. They, the purser, also gave their support to the second prince, forming an alliance clearly against the greed of the Emperor and the crown prince. Meanwhile, with Teo and Set, the days had passed, and finally, Teo's Ruth was manifesting. Set had mentally prepared himself for that situation, because he understood that Teo, also being alpha, was now going to be the one below. Although he was very scared about it, he had to remain calm for the sake of his beloved. But really, Teo was happy and satisfied with continuing to receive Set. Inside, that was all he needed to be well. At the same time, Carleon met Rose. Carleon was willing to use any means to find Teo and discover the identity of his Capri. Rose was perfect to be manipulated. With a look that transmitted apparent tranquility, Carleon asked him if he still hadn't been able to forget Teo. Rose answered that no. After all, Teo was the first alpha in his life. With this, Carleon had the green light to use Rose as much as he wanted. While these two continued to love each other, they ignored the world until Teo's rut ended. At the same time, Rose was talking to her sister about Teo's Capri. According to him, he had very important information that would be helpful to the Emperor, helping to capture Teo's Capri. Well, throughout the Empire, gossip had already spread that Teo's Capri was a Langeras. Rose was determined to make Teo suffer for not choosing him as his partner. When she saw him, Farah loved her brother more than anything in the world. She tells him that now she understands why Teo didn't choose him as his partner. She only saw in him an immature and greedy boy. If he loved Teo as much as he says, he wouldn't want his destruction with such eagerness. Farah reminds him once again that she loves him, but her older sister advises her not to get involved in that matter any further. Well, not everyone is like her. There will be people who, instead of protecting him, will only want to use him and make fun of him. When saying goodbye to Rose, Farah gives the order to keep an eye on Carleon because she knew perfectly well that this unfortunate man was manipulating her naive younger brother. After having spent their Ruth together, strangely, Teo was very tired and nauseous. When Eddie checks him, in astonishment, he gives him the news that he is pregnant. The doctor explains that Smyrna's condition is not something that disappears overnight. Remember that Teo, despite being an alpha male, has a small uterus due to his conversion as Smyrna. These internal organs would not disappear instantly, and having spent his Ruth together with another alpha, who was also dominant, it was almost expected that he would become pregnant again. With this news, Teo asks him not to tell anyone. Set could not find out that he would be a father again. He knew that if he told him this, then now he would not be able to take him away from his side. That could not happen. Set had to be free and fulfill his goals. He had to become king and restore the Angelus. When going to talk to Agris to ask him how it was possible that he got pregnant so quickly again, he explains that he is from the dragon's blood. In Set, probably with other alphas, it would not have happened, but the instinct to preserve his species and ensure his offspring was stronger. He tells him the same thing that the doctor told him. His state of Smyrna was not going to disappear overnight. Also, another reason why they are so compatible is because dragons incubate eggs to have their children. It happens that the purser also have children through eggs, and above all, the union of both is so strong because they are destined souls. He had already told him before, but now he reminded him. Their souls were destined to be together from the beginning. Teo tried to assimilate this. Hearing such a thing as that they were united by destiny seemed like something so cruel. After all, the circumstances in which they met had been deplorable. Set was his enemy, and he had the mission to kill him. How could destiny be so terrible? On the other hand, Carleon the Emperor continued with his plan to catch Teo and destroy Perseru. They felt closer and closer to that goal. At the same time, it was about understanding why Teo was so sensitive and sickly in recent days. He didn't imagine anything about the pregnancy, because Teo had assured him that his body was already that of an alpha. So he didn't suspect anything at all, but just at that moment, important news arrived from Angelus. His nanny, who was like his second mother and magic teacher, had died. When he told Teo this, of course, she comforted him and insisted that he go say goodbye to her one last time. He shouldn't worry about him or the egg, because the nest they had built had enough pheromones stored, so they would be fine. He could travel in peace, and didn't want him to regret not having said goodbye to her. Again, with Rose, he gave Carleon the information he had obtained about Teo's Capri. He assured him that they were Seren Marita, the leader of the revolutionary army of the Lares. With this information, Carleon had enough evidence to accuse Perseru of treason. The Emperor would destroy them, and he would stay with Teo. It was a perfect plan. In gratitude, he even goes so far as to kiss Rose, which he didn't seem to like at all. But after all, he kept telling himself that he shouldn't cling to Teo. He could enjoy as much as he wanted with other alphas, but as he leaves, we see Carleon wipe his mouth in disgust. In his eyes, Rose is just a capricious, selfish, and easily manipulated child. He also gives the crown prince a stone with a recording of everything Rose had confessed. They only had to alter a few things, and they would have the necessary evidence. In addition, Carleon had unfortunately discovered the informant that Farah had sent to keep him under surveillance. So he sent her his head, as a gift and a warning. Seeing this, Farah knew that Rose had made the mistake of cooperating with Carleon. Rose had made a great mistake by trusting that man. Farah opens her eyes and tells him that he was a fool to trust her words. Carleon would not hesitate to kill him. When all this war is over, that's why, with the pain in her soul, no matter how much she loves him, she had to exile him to protect him. That way, she will prevent her dear brother Rose from getting involved with Carleon. But above all, she regretted with Ali for not having been able to avoid the tragedy that was coming from now on. When she was informed of what Carleon planned to do, Adali knew that the Emperor would use as a pretext that Teo had taken a Capri of Lyris to take them to war. Being so, it was necessary. Teo must return as soon as possible to Perseru. Well, if they realized that he was not in the territory, the war would break out even faster. Teo said goodbye to Set. Obviously, he had not told him that he would return to Odia. So when he made sure that he had left with the help of Agris, he would be able to return to Odia quickly using teleportation magic. But before that, he entrusted his egg to Eden. He did not know if he would be present for its birth, but the only thing he could do now was keep it safe, away from the Emperor. The Emperor had called a meeting with the 4 dukes of the Empire. Both this old man and Carleon already expected that Teo would not arrive. Carleon had investigated enough to know that Teo had fled with his Capri, so seeing him there meant that those two had something to do with each other. It was blatant, the way they had been protecting him. After a brief greeting, immediately the Emperor confronts him, showing him the evidence, where the male Rose claimed that Teo, Perseru's Capri, was the leader of the revolutionary army of Lares. But before this, Teo knew very well how to turn the situation around. He decides to take advantage of the fact that nobody knew the physical appearance of Set, because he assures everyone present that it is true that the description given by Rose corresponds to Marita. But they must understand one thing. He, as leader of the Perseru army, and in charge of eliminating the rebels of Lares, was the only one who knew what the real physical appearance of Seren Marita was like. So how did they give more importance and credibility to the words of a man who had never been in the war, and who had not directly met Saran enough to assure that that was his caprice? As he had assured them before, he had already executed the capture of Laris. And as for his caprice, everyone had seen it was nothing more than a mercenary who coincidentally fit the description from Saran Marita. In addition, this man had taken the egg when it was born and escaped with it. The last thing he knew was that he died after facing orcs. That is, in case you did not understand this part much, Teo told the emperor to close the orc. Since neither the male Rose nor anyone else present there, besides him, had seen Saran Marita's face, so they could not assure what his physical appearance was, the one who was his caprice stole his son and died. And well, he tells the emperor that he is an old lizard for accusing him of something like that. In addition, his intentions were clear from the beginning. He wanted to accuse him of treason and destroy his family. Before this countermeasure, the emperor had nothing more to say. Although he hated to admit it, all of Teo's arguments were valid. With this, he ensures victory, at least for the moment. But Carleon would not stay still. When talking to him and offering his condolences for supposedly having lost his son, he also pours pheromone on him. This makes Teo's nausea noticeable. He warns him that what he just did is disrespectful, as well as insulting. Who was his caprice was also an offense to him. With this, Carleon suspected even more that Teo is still hiding that man. On the other hand, Farah was telling everything that happened that day to Alvaron, the second prince of the empire. Because although before his father and the others he pretended to be weak, and that he did not care about the affairs of the empire, in reality any information was relevant to his plan. After such an exhausting meeting, Teo meets his mother. While they were having dinner, Adali does not take long to notice the state of her son and feeling discovered. That is where Teo confesses that he spent his Ruth with Set and became pregnant again. But knowing how his current situation was, that child in her womb was not necessary, so he would get rid of him. Adali did not deny that she was surprised. Her son had been reckless, but she remembers that his nickname Clover, that name had been given by Miriam, and it meant happiness. Miriam had managed to see his future, and in this, he was happy. But if his happiness was to get rid of that egg, she understood it. But if not, she asked him to reflect on bringing him into the world, and reaffirms the fact that she, as his mother, loves him and supports him. Whatever his decision, she and Cirrus would be with him. At night in his solitude, Teo missed Set tremendously. He thought he heard his voice calling him, but he knew she wasn't there, and the feeling only increased. The pain in his stomach was persistent. He just wanted to be in Set's arms. The next day, his body kept begging for Set. As a last measure of security, he had taken some of his clothes that kept his scent. He remembered his words when he told him that some Omegas made their nests with their alphas things when they missed their mate. Now he thought he understood that insistent desire. Being surrounded by his scent made him feel as if he were really in his arms. Shortly after, Carleon arrived. Apart from giving false apologies for what had happened before, he proposed that they have a friendly duel, which Teo accepts. But in reality, Carleon had something else in mind. Obviously, Teo ended up winning, but since Set had managed to hurt his face, he pretended to want to clean his wound with this handkerchief, barely stained with blood. He goes to a priest to check his suspicions, and when he sees the light emanating, it is verified that Teo Perceru was pregnant. With this information, he goes to the emperor to tell him what he had discovered. The old man was furious because most likely his son had Lara's blood in him. But he understood that a reason like this was not enough reason to order the destruction of Perceru. Instead, Carleon proposes a plan. Given that some regions of the empire were being strongly affected by pirates, he would make them face against Perceru, who were precisely weak in terms of military force. That way, they would get rid of the pirates, and they could hide the elimination of Perceru as if it were an unfortunate attack by the pirates. And they would only give the final blow. He only asked one thing, to leave Teo's fate in his hands. A few days later, Teo received a letter from Set. In this, he informed him that everything had gone well with the farewell of his nanny. In addition to missing him very much, Teo also missed him with all his being but did not think it was convenient to write a response when it was likely that they would never see each other again. Likewise, shortly after, he received news from his mother that pirates had invaded their borders. Teo knew perfectly well that this movement was almost on purpose, because he knew that Carleon and his army were in charge of protecting that part of the sea and that they had stepped aside to let the pirates pass. It was a rather shameless move. Teo apologized to his mother, because it was her fault that they were now attacking them in this way. Adali understood her son's feelings but preferred to give him strength to face what was to come. She would return to her territory and gather her troops to join them in battle, so for the moment, she would have to leave him alone. Teo only wished that she returned to Sana. He knew that his mother was strong, but it was the emperor they were facing. He just hoped that nothing would happen to her. At the same time, Set was preparing to return to Teo, but that's when Biden appeared, giving him the news that he had heard from Jigs that he had gone to investigate Odia on his own, and what he had heard was not good at all. Biden realized that the Perseru rejected the emperor's mandate to search for the magic stone of creation. That is why he stained his name, accusing them of treason, and both non-nobles and commoners began to despise the Persis house. Set knew what this meant because his people suffered the misfortune of extinction because of the emperor's wishes. He knew that if the state of the Persis house fell in this way, Teo was undoubtedly in great danger. But when he wanted to go look for him, he was stopped by his followers. They expressed their desire to join the battle for Teo. They knew that he was their enemy at the beginning. But if he was the one who had given birth to the descendant of the dragon, then they were also willing to fight by his side and protect him. Set was extremely grateful to them. But first, he would have to go to Monteria to speak with Agris. Upon arriving there, he finds out from the mouth of the Duke that Teo had returned alone to Odia to face this whole situation. He assures him that his baby is in perfect condition, but there was something else he had to tell him. If Teo decided to leave without telling him anything, it was because he always looked for how to protect him until the last moment. Besides, Teo was pregnant again. At the same time with this, Teo had learned of the emperor's mandate to attack the Perseru house due to their betrayal, so they would not sit idly by. So he also ordered all his troops to be prepared. If the emperor was willing to attack them, they would also give battle. Back with Set, he was incredulous at the news that Teo was expecting a second child from him again. Agris remembers that if Teo decided to move away, it was to protect him. Also, if he wanted to join him in the war, he had something to give him. It is true that he remained neutral in any situation, but it was not wrong to break the rules from time to time. So he gives him a small vial containing his blood. Remember that Agris is a pure dragon. That is why his blood has the power to awaken others with the dragon's blood in them, as is the case with Set. Agris tells him that if he drinks that liquid, he will awaken the power of the dragon inside him, but he could lose his humanity and remain a beast if he decided to take that. Set does not hesitate to accept such an opportunity, even at the cost of his own life. If he could protect Teo, any sacrifice was worth it. When he was back with Teo, he reminds his men that they will soon go to war, so he asked them to lend them their strength. Since, as Teo had said, he is the one who gave birth to his first son, and now they would have a second descendant. He also asks them not to hold a grudge against Teo Perseru, because in that time that he was with him, he was able to realize the great guilt he carried within himself. Teo could never forgive himself for what he did to Laris, and that was reflected in his guardian spirit. Set never told him, but those little spirits were a reflection of the true personality of their creator. That's why Set knew that Teo was afraid and always scared, but he hid his feelings. Having been created as a Perseru, in addition, Teo gave the order to kill him as soon as they captured him. But he didn't. Instead of simply taking his pheromone, he gave him affection and took him with love. That's why now that he was expecting a second child, he asked for their strength to join the battle and fight alongside him. Of course, everyone agreed to help him. At the same time, Teo also prepared to face the tough battle that was the enemy forces approached, who were Carleon and the first crown prince. They totaled 60,000 men. Even though Perseru only had 30,000, Teo was not worried. Since to reach them, they would have to go through the forest of the beasts. Perseru had experience dealing with those monsters, but he knew that the enemies did not, so he would only wait for their numbers to decrease as they advanced, thanks to those confrontations with the beasts. Even so, the battle was inevitable. Thousands of men died on both sides, but even with this, Perseru had managed to match the numbers. Carleon was calm because those 60,000 men had only been the first group. In a few hours, reinforcements would arrive with another 60,000 more. Carleon was willing to destroy Perseru until there was nothing left. Precisely in the next battle, Teo watched with concern as they were being outnumbered by the enemy. At that rate, they would undoubtedly lose. But that is when, making his epic entrance, Set appears before his beloved Teo. He had also brought all his men as reinforcements. These would not be easy opponents because they could use magic and spiritual power. Seeing him there, Teo couldn't believe it, but without hesitating a second longer, he throws himself into his arms, happy for their reunion. Still hugging, Set whispers, "Teo, thank you for giving me the opportunity to protect you." After a brief greeting and promising each other that they would talk about their new pregnancy and other things when all that was over, Set, without hesitation, launches himself straight into battle, taking all the dragon blood that Agris had given him, causing Teo to become upset seeing his appearance. He knew it was dangerous for Set to fight in that state, but Set was unstoppable. He killed hundreds of enemies in a couple of attacks. Seeing this, Carleon believes that it is an opportunity to hunt the dragon. So, taking the same weapon that he had used to kill the Kraken, he hits a fatal shot in Set's chest. All this was witnessed by Teo, who helplessly watched as Set collapsed before his eyes. Carleon believed that he really had finished off the dragon, and now they had the advantage. But Set, using his last strength, emerges completely transformed into his dragon form. Everyone knew what that meant. Set had lost his humanity and was now nothing more than an enormous beast, thirsty for blood. For his part, Teo, far from being afraid, was overcome with concern when he saw Set's chest. While he was hurt because of the attack of Carleon's weapon, ignoring all the warnings, he reached the dragon. He knew that Set was still there. He begged him to return to his side and not leave him alone. The dragon soon calmed his anger because he had recognized Teo as his partner. Carleon, seeing that they were both together, believed that it was the perfect opportunity to finish them both off. But Set would not allow his great love to be harmed. With one last attack, he managed to sweep him away with thousands of enemies, and with this, he also eliminated Carleon's arm. With this, he fell exhausted because his life was ending. Teo begged him not to leave, to stay with him. They still had to name their second son. He needed him in his life because he loved him too much. After so long, Teo had the courage to tell him how much he loved him with all his being. That's when his protective spirits appear, covering both of them with a warm aura that gave them peace. Do you remember that, according to the traditions of the Lares, when a child is going to be born, both parents plant a tree? And from its leaves, guardian spirits are created for the child. Well, if you had forgotten, when Seth and Teo planted the olive tree, and they both blew on some leaves, they gave life to the spirits. These take the appearance of those who invoke them, in this case, Set and Teo. So we see what appears to be Set's tree that Teo destroyed, and we see how the protective tree is sprouting again for him, and as the protective spirits take the form of those who invoke them. At that moment, before Teo, appeared the spirits of Set's parents. Teo was scared because he thought they were going to take him away. And when he saw the appearance of one of them, Teo remembers that moment in his childhood, when Miriam told him that she had seen his future, and that in it, he would be full of blessings and happiness, but that he would also carry with him an enormous guilt. Miriam, who already had Set in her womb, knew what was going to happen to Laris, and that he would be the executioner who would end his race. Even so, she smiled at him and asked him to be friends with her son. Being aware of this, Teo wonders, "What have I done?" He felt deserving of all the bad things that were happening to him, but that is where he hears the voice of those spirits telling him, "We do not blame you. You are welcome." That tragedy was part of the destiny of the dragons, and we were willing to accept it. There is no reason for you to suffer for that, so move on. Only until then could Teo feel that he received the forgiveness and comfort that his soul needed so much. Meanwhile, Set felt that his conscience was sinking deeper and deeper. But he could also see how it was Teo who rescued him from that darkness. That's how, in the real world, he regains his human form. And what really happened is that Set did die with that attack, but the dragon inside him had decided to give his own life so that Set could revive and be with Teo, the human with whom he had fallen in love, meaning that they both had a new opportunity to share the rest of their lives. At the same time, the army of the first prince retreated, devastated by the defeat. But that is where Adalia appears with her men, willing to not let them escape. Likewise, Farah, together with Alvaron, made an appearance before the emperor. He knew what it meant that the second prince, whom he had not seen for a long time, had arrived to finish him off. This is how the empire welcomed a new emperor. A few days later, Teo was talking with his mother about how the whole attack of the pirates had ended. It could be resolved. Thanks to the support of Farah and the second prince, Albaran was a just powerful, intelligent man who also respected and supported Angelus and Purser. When he took the position of emperor, he blamed Carleon and his father for wanting to destroy Purser and revealed all the injustices committed towards the people of Angelus. He also destroyed his brother and took away his position as crown prince. Shortly after, they found out that both the old emperor and Carleon had died. With this, a new era of peace arrived with the new emperor. Also, they had also returned their rights to Angelus and restored the position and honor of the Purkis house. Shortly after Tia, with his son, arrived next to Set, he was still sleeping because he was recovering his strength, having used his dragon form, but it didn't last long, so he immediately woke up because what he wanted most was to be with Teo again. It had been so long since they were able to be together that moment. It seemed like a dream. Both of them didn't waste a single moment they gave each other with everything they had. They spent hours and hours breaking their bodies, but when they were going for another round, they heard something break. It was there that they realized that their son had finally come out of the egg. Very excited, they watched as the baby had just come out. Both of them welcomed their daughter. Little Tara was finally in their arms. Shortly after her daughter received Oizan's blessing, Tara Purkis had a great future ahead of her. As time passed, Eden continued to monitor his second pregnancy. Everything indicated that he was fine, but it seemed strange to him that the shape of the egg was so unusual. Just at that moment, Set arrived. He had something important that he had to talk to him about. As it was already known, the new emperor had met Angelus. That's why when the reconstruction began, it would be normal for Set, as king of that nation, to have descendants, a queen, and concubines. After all, it wasn't certain that her second pregnancy would go well, and she didn't know if the child that was on the way would be a good successor for Laris. What he wanted to make him understand was that it was okay for him if he decided to take that path, take a queen, and start a new family. But, in tears, Set tells him that he can't believe he's telling him that. He didn't want or think about having anyone else in his life other than him. There was no one else he could love, as much as he loves him. It was true that they couldn't be together as much as before. After all, he had his responsibility as heir to Angelus, and at the same time, he also had to take charge as Duke of Purser. For the first time, Teo wished he was Omega. If he had been, he could be with Set no matter what, but they were both alphas with duties to fulfill. The only thing that they could do was find a way to continue seeing each other. After all, Lares wasn't that far away. Time kept passing until the day of the second delivery arrived. Teo was once again going through the terrible pain of giving birth, but even so, everything had gone well, and when they thought it was all over, Eden arrived to give them the news that for the first time in the history of Purser, 2 children had been born, and they were twins. The years kept passing, and we can see how Tara, Cien, and Sisa were already preteens. Tara and Cien had taken the surname Perkseris, while Sisa took the surname Marita, with him being the crown prince of Angelus. At the same time, Set came to greet his great love. After all, they could only see each other once a month, but the love between them was still as alive as ever. Tara was the happiest every time her father Set came to visit with her brother. Everyone was happy to be able to reunite as a family. The end? Words from the author of the manhwa. Hello, this is Brothers Without a Tomorrow. Finally, Smyrna and Capri has come to its conclusion. The comic was originally supposed to be 60-ish episodes long, but ayasha. As the story went along, it swelled and ended up being 70 episodes long. There were a lot of changes and edits to the comic along the way. It feels like years have passed working on this comic, but even with 70 episodes, the entire story couldn't be told, so side stories are a real possibility. Some stories taken from episodes which had to be cut short will be elaborated upon in the side stories. But with all that said, because of existing commitments and schedules, it might take a while for the side story episodes to be published. All of you dear readers, waiting in eager anticipation, will be the main motivation as the episodes are prepared. Well, until that time comes and we meet again, thank you so much everyone.